France's government has collapsed after a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister Michel Barnier. The move plunges the country into a political and financial crisis. It's the first time the French government has been brought down in such a vote since 1962. The left-wing bloc in the country's national executive and Marine Le Pen's hard-right National Rally combined to oust Mr Barnier after he pushed through a budget without a vote. That budget is now null and void, and a weakened President Macron will have to try to find someone else to appoint. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, about what this turmoil in Europe's second-largest country means for the EU. But first, let's go live to Paris and to our correspondent there, Andrew Harding. Andrew.
Yes, good evening, Rita. The voting took place in the Parliament building behind me just a few hours ago this evening in Paris. But essentially, it all became inevitable earlier this summer when the French people voted a parliament that was completely deadlocked, unable to agree on anything, no interest in coalition or consensus. A coalition government of sorts, a very fragile one, was scraped together, but it looked very vulnerable from the start, and tonight was the moment that it fell. What happens next is unclear, but it looks like France is entering a period, perhaps for months, of deep political and perhaps financial instability.
Moments before the voting began here in Paris tonight, Michel Barnier made a final, rather forlorn plea to French MPs. The Prime Minister urged them to back him, his government and his budget, or create chaos.
Mesdames et messieurs les députés, je ne me résous pas.
I can't believe a majority of MPs here will vote to destabilize our institutions at a moment where our country is going through a deep moral, economic, financial and civic crisis.
Économique, financière et civique.
But the answer came back fast and conclusive.
Pour l'adoption 331.
The Speaker of Parliament revealing that 57% of MPs had voted no confidence in the government. Politicians from the hard right and hard left of French politics briefly uniting on this one issue.
I don't feel my head spinning, and I don't consider this a victory. We had a choice to make, and the choice we made was to protect French people.
Having tasted blood, many French MPs now want more. Specifically, they want President Emmanuel Macron ousted. Heading home from a trip to Saudi Arabia tonight, a badly weakened president has made it clear he's staying put. It is 62 years since France last found itself in a situation like this. On that occasion, President de Gaulle stood his ground and eventually regained control of Parliament. Today feels rather different. France is in debt, public frustration growing, a nation wrestling, like so many now, with the forces of polarisation and populism.
I
think it's tragic, says this woman, of today's vote. Nobody is considering the consequences. There's a lot of anxiety, this man adds. I'm upset both with the forces on the left and the far right. Tonight, a government has fallen, but France's political deadlock remains firmly in place. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Paris.
And Katya is here with me. So turmoil in France, Katya, what are the wider implications for Europe?
Well, you're right to ask, Rita, because it's not just French citizens who are worrying about the cost of living and the future of their country in economic and political turmoil. France, alongside Germany, is traditionally seen as the motor of the European Union. But it's not just France. In Germany, we've recently seen the coalition government collapse. They're heading to a snap general election in February. This is not a good look from the so-called motor, which is spluttering. You know, these are unstable political times. What about that strong united united front that Europe wants to have, in the face of aggressive Russia? What about the strong united front that the EU wants to portray in the face of Donald Trump's return to the White House? We know he's no fan of the EU. He's threatening import tariffs. He wants bigger defence spending. And that brings us to the economic impact of what's happening in France, the second largest economy in the Eurozone country. And what's the largest economy in the Eurozone? Germany. Both of those economies looking extremely wobbly, and the other countries in the currency then worrying that they're going to get dragged down into the economic doldrums as well. So Emmanuel Macron is saying he's going to give a speech to the nation tomorrow evening. He'll want to seem like an island of calm. He insists his country's stable, but that's definitely not how it's looking, from the outside, Rita. Calls for his own resignation, and you have Brussels, Moscow and Washington watching extremely closely.